10-year-old boy saves man from being buried alive at his own funeral. The silence in the small chapel of Maplewood Springs in rural Pennsylvania was shattered by the sharp, desperate cry of a boy. Those gathered at the wake of the respected Dr. Robert Miller turned in shock to face young Ethan Thompson, who was frantically pointing at the casket. "He moved! I saw it! Dr. Robert is alive!" Ethan exclaimed, running toward the open casket, ignoring the disapproving stares of the adults around him. Mrs. Jennifer, the boy's mother, felt her face burn with embarrassment. Her son had always been imaginative, but interrupting a funeral was beyond the pale. She hurried down the center aisle of the chapel, between the dark wooden pews, to reach Ethan before he caused any more of a scene. "Ethan, for heaven's sake, what do you think you're doing?" she whispered, grabbing his arm. "We're leaving right now." The boy, his light brown hair tousled and his eyes wide, resisted. His wrinkled white shirt stood in stark contrast to the solemn dark attire of the mourners. "Mom, I swear." His eyelids moved. "It's true," Ethan insisted, trying to pull free from her grip. Michael Thompson, the boy's father, approached with firm steps and a stern expression. "Son, this isn't funny. We're here to pay our respects," he said gravely, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Let's go." "But Dad, Enough, Ethan." Michael cut him off, glancing around at the hushed whispers and disapproving looks from the crowd. The Miller family, seated in the front row, watched the scene with a mix of discomfort and irritation. Patricia Miller, the widow, an elegant woman even in her grief, shot a frosty glare toward the Thompsons. Her son, Richard Miller, a man in his early 40s, whispered something in her ear and she nodded silently. In the commotion to remove Ethan from the chapel, the phone in his pants pocket slipped out and fell into the casket, landing near the deceased doctor's hand. "My phone!" Ethan exclaimed, reaching for it. "Don't you dare!" his mother hissed, mortified. The funeral director, Mr. Parker, a thin man in a perfectly fitted black suit, stepped forward to handle the situation. "Allow me," he said, retrieving the phone from the casket. As he did, the device accidentally activated the temperature app Ethan had used earlier for a school project. The proximity sensor registered a reading as it lightly brushed against Dr. Roberts' hand. Mr. Parker frowned briefly at the screen, but quickly composed himself and handed the phone to Ethan's father. "I believe this belongs to your son, Mr. Thompson," he said politely but firmly. "Thank you, and please forgive the disturbance," Michael replied, taking the phone and guiding Ethan toward the exit. "Dad, look at the phone." The app picked. "GAPA temperature," Ethan whispered as he was led away. "No more stories today, son," Michael cut in, too embarrassed to entertain his son's claims. Outside the chapel, Jennifer fought back tears of humiliation. "Ethan, you can't behave like this. He was your grandfather's friend, for goodness sake. Your grandfather would be so disappointed." "But Mom, I'm telling the truth," Ethan protested, frustration welling in his eyes. "Why won't anyone believe me?" Michael took a deep breath, trying to rein in his own frustration. "We're going home. Tomorrow, we'll talk about respect and proper behavior." As they drove home, the sky, once a clear blue, began to darken rapidly. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon, signaling an approaching storm. Ethan remained silent the entire ride, staring out the car window and occasionally checking his phone. "Look here, Dad," he tried again, showing the screen. The app registered 95.4 degrees when it touched his hand. "Dead people don't have that." "Temperature." "Ethan, please," his father replied, exhausted. "Enough already." When they arrived home, a modest but comfortable house on the outskirts of Maplewood Springs, Ethan went straight to his room. Jennifer and Michael exchanged worried glances in the living room. "He's always had a vivid imagination," Jennifer remarked, sitting on the couch. "But this is too much." "I think we should talk to Dr. Pamela about this," Michael suggested, referring to the child psychologist who occasionally saw Ethan. "This fixation with Dr. Robert, it's not normal." While his parents talked in the living room, Ethan lay on his bed staring at the ceiling. His room, decorated with astronomy and science posters, had always been his sanctuary. On the bedside table, photos of him with his maternal grandfather, George Wilson, who had been close friends with Dr. Robert, reminded him of happier times. The house phone rang, and Ethan heard his mother answer. Moments later, she called for her husband. "It's the funeral home," she said, her voice tense. "The storm's getting worse and they're postponing the burial until tomorrow. The roads to the cemetery are in bad shape." Ethan sat up immediately, his heart racing. This was his chance, he thought, a chance to prove he was right. Soon after, there was a soft knock on his door. It wasn't his father's firm knock, but the gentler one of his grandmother, Ruth, Jennifer's mother, who had lived with them since becoming a widow. "May I come in, sweetheart?" she asked, slowly opening the door. Grandma Ruth, her gray hair tied in a simple bun and wearing thin-rimmed glasses, had a face marked by time, but her eyes still sparkled with life. She sat on the edge of Ethan's. "Dad, I heard what happened today," she said, smoothing a stray lock of his hair. "You think I'm making things up too?" Ethan asked, hurt. Grandma Ruth adjusted her glasses and looked intently at her grandson. "You know, Ethan, your Grandpa George always said you had eyes that see beyond what others do," she remarked with a faint smile. "Do you know what Dr. Robert specialized in?" Ethan frowned, trying to recall his grandfather's stories. "He was a doctor for the elderly, right?" "Yes, but before that he specialized in comas and catalepsy," Grandma Ruth explained, lowering her voice as if sharing a secret. "Do you know what catalepsy is?" Ethan shook his head. "It's a condition where a person seems gone, but they're actually in a very deep state of unconsciousness. The body goes stiff, breathing is almost undetectable, the heartbeat so faint it's hard to pick up." Ethan's eyes widened. "So I could be right? He could be alive?" Grandma Ruth sighed. "I don't want to give you false hope, sweetheart, but Dr. Robert always had a heart condition that in extreme situations could cause something like this. Your grandfather told me once." Ethan jumped out of bed, suddenly energized. "Grandma, we have to do something. They're burying him tomorrow." "Calm down, Ethan," Grandma Ruth urged, holding his hands. "What exactly did you see?" "His eyelids moved, I'm sure of it. And then when my phone fell, it registered a temperature, Grandma. Look here." Ethan grabbed his phone and showed her the app's history. Grandma Ruth examined it carefully. 95.4 degrees isn't normal, but it's also not the temperature of someone who—" She hesitated, searching for the right words. "Who has already passed." A distant thunderclap boomed, making the windows vibrate slightly. Outside, the rain began to fall harder. "Your parents won't believe us," Grandma Ruth continued, thoughtful. "After what happened today, they'll think I'm feeding into your fantasies." "What if we talk to Mrs. Martha?" suggested Ethan, referring to Dr. Robert Miller's companion. "She's a retired nurse, isn't she?" "She was, yes," Grandma Ruth confirmed. "They worked together for many years before retiring. But she wasn't at the wake today, was she?" Ethan shook his head. "I didn't see her there. I wonder why." Grandma Ruth adjusted her glasses again, a habit she had when deep in thought. "They say she and Dr. Robert's stepson Richard don't get along. Maybe that's why she stayed away, or maybe—" She left the sentence hanging. "Maybe what, Grandma?" "Maybe she has her own suspicions too," Grandma Ruth finished, looking out the window at the growing storm. "But we can't go out in this weather, Ethan, and your parents would never allow it." Ethan stood up, determined. "Then I'll go alone. I know where she lives. It's that yellow house near the health clinic." "Ethan, no, it's dangerous to go out in this storm, and your parents would be frantic with worry," Grandma Ruth warned. Downstairs, Mrs. Jennifer called. "How doesn't Mom, Ethan, dinner's ready?" "Let's go down," said Grandma Ruth, standing up. "We'll think of something, but promise me you won't do anything impulsive." Ethan hesitated for a moment, but finally nodded. During dinner, the mood was tense. Michael barely spoke to his son, while Mrs. Jennifer tried to keep the conversation casual, though her voice betrayed her nervousness. Grandma Ruth silently observed everyone, occasionally giving meaningful glances to her grandson. After dinner, Ethan was sent to bed early as part of his punishment for his behavior at the wake. As he got ready for bed, the storm outside reached its peak. Lightning intermittently lit up his room, followed by thunder that made the whole house shake. Ethan couldn't sleep. The image of Dr. Robert's eyelids faintly moving remained vivid in his mind. What if he was really alive? What if no one did anything? Tomorrow would be too late. Determined, Ethan waited until the house was completely silent. It was nearly 11 p.m. when he finally got out of bed. He threw a rain jacket over his pajamas, pulled on his rain boots, and grabbed a small flashlight he kept in his desk drawer. Carefully, he opened his bedroom window. The rain had eased slightly but was still coming down hard. Ethan knew what he was about to do was dangerous and that his parents would be furious, but he felt he had no choice. If Dr. Robert was really alive, as he believed, every minute counted. Carefully, he climbed down the ivy-covered trellis beside his window, a path he'd used a few times before for less dramatic secret adventures. His feet touched the wet ground, and he immediately felt the cold rain soaking his hair. Ethan had two possible destinations: the funeral home where Dr. Robert's body was, or Mrs. Martha's house. After a moment's hesitation, he decided he needed an adult on his side. He would go to Mrs. Martha first. Maplewood Springs was a small, quiet town where everyone knew each other. During the day, Ethan could make the trip to Mrs. Martha's house in less than 15 minutes. But at night, in the rain with the streets deserted, everything felt different and more threatening. He hurried along, staying close to buildings for some shelter from the rain. The streetlights cast yellow circles on the wet pavement, and occasionally a car passed, forcing Ethan to hide in the shadows to avoid being seen. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. After nearly half an hour of walking, Ethan finally arrived at Mrs. Martha's house. It was a modest, yellow-painted home with a small front garden that, at this hour and under the rain, looked like a tangled mess of dark plants. A light was on inside, visible through the living room curtains. Ethan hesitated for a moment before climbing the 3 steps to the porch. He took a deep breath and rang the doorbell. For long seconds, nothing happened. He was about to ring again when he heard footsteps approaching. The door opened, revealing Mrs. Martha. She was a woman in her 60s with short grey hair and an expression that mixed surprise and concern at seeing a soaking wet child on her doorstep at this time of night. "Good heavens, boy! What are you doing out here alone in this rain?" she exclaimed, opening the door wider. Come in before you catch pneumonia." Ethan stepped in timidly and stood on the entryway rug, aware of the water dripping from his clothes onto the floor. "I'm sorry to show up like this, Mrs. Martha. I'm Ethan Thompson, George Wilson's grandson." Mrs. Martha's face lit up with recognition. "Ethan, my goodness, how you've grown. I haven't seen you since—" She stopped, remembering the situation. "But what happened? Do your parents know you're here?" Ethan shook his head, feeling a pang of guilt. "It's about Dr. Robert," he said, deciding to get straight to the point. "I think—" "No, I'm sure he isn't dead." Mrs. Martha froze for a moment, her eyes studying Ethan intently, as if trying to figure out whether the boy was joking or delirious. "What did you say?" "At the wake today, I saw his eyelids move," Ethan explained, quickly. "And when my phone fell into the casket, it registered a temperature, 95.4 degrees. Dead people don't have that temperature, right?" Mrs. Martha brought a hand to her mouth, her expression shifting from disbelief to deep concern. For a terrible moment, Ethan thought she wouldn't believe him either. "Come into the living room," she said finally, her voice almost a whisper. "We need to talk." Mrs. Martha's living room was cozy, with simple but well-kept furniture. On the walls were several photos of her with Dr. Robert at different times: trips, graduations, social events. On a small side table, there was a framed picture of the two of them standing with what looked like a medical team. "Sit down, Ethan." She gestured to a couch covered with a colorful throw. "I'll get you a towel to dry off and something warm to drink." Minutes later, she returned with a fluffy towel, a steaming cup of hot chocolate, and a set of dry clothes. "These were my nephew's. They should fit you," she explained, handing him the clothes. "The bathroom's down the hall to the right. You can change there." When Ethan returned to the living room, now dry and warm, he found Mrs. Martha sitting in an armchair, staring at a photograph of Dr. Robert in her hands. Her eyes were moist. "Please tell me exactly what you saw," she asked, setting the photo aside. Ethan recounted in detail what he had witnessed in the chapel, the slight movement of the eyelids, the temperature registered by his phone, even how Mr. Parker from the funeral home had seemed puzzled for a second before covering it up. Mrs. Martha listened carefully, nodding occasionally. When Ethan finished, she stood and walked to a bookshelf, pulling out a document folder. "Ethan, what I'm about to tell you is very serious," she said, sitting back down. Dr. Robert suffered from a rare heart condition called Takotsubo syndrome, also known as stress cardiomyopathy. In extreme cases, it can cause a state very similar to a— she hesitated, searching for the right words to explain to a child. A state where the person seems gone, but is actually in a kind of suspended animation. "Like the catalepsy my grandma mentioned?" asked Ethan. Mrs. Martha's eyes widened slightly. "Your grandma brought that up? Ruth was always a sharp woman." "Yes, similar to catalepsy, but for cardiac reasons. The heart becomes so weak that the beats are almost imperceptible, the breathing practically invisible." She opened the folder, showing Ethan some medical documents with charts and terms he didn't understand. For years, Robert studied these cases. It was his specialty before he dedicated himself to geriatrics. He himself had experienced minor episodes of this condition, always triggered by intense emotions or extreme stress. A particularly loud thunderclap made the house lights flicker momentarily. Mrs. Martha glanced at the window, where the rain still fell relentlessly, before continuing. "Last week, he was very agitated. He'd discovered something serious and was determined to expose it, even under threats." "What kind of threats?" asked Ethan, leaning forward. Mrs. Martha pulled another document from the folder, this one looking like a report with a medical clinic's letterhead. Robert found out that the new geriatric wing his stepson Richard was building with money from the foundation he created was using substandard materials. The building wouldn't be safe for the elderly. He confronted Richard on Monday and said he'd report everything to the authorities. And then he had the collapse, Ethan finished. "Tuesday morning," Mrs. Martha confirmed. "I was away visiting my sister in Philadelphia. When I got back on Wednesday, they'd already declared him dead, and Richard had taken control of everything. They didn't even let me see him." She stood again, now heading to a kitchen drawer. She returned with a medicine bottle. "These are Robert's heart medications, but look closely." She opened the bottle and poured a few pills into her palm. "The real ones are white with a blue line in the middle. These are completely white." Ethan examined the pills, a chill running down his spine. "Someone switched his medicine?" Mrs. Martha nodded gravely. "I'm sure that's what caused the collapse, not to—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Not to permanently harm him, but to leave him temporarily incapacitated until everything was settled. Richard didn't expect the condition. To be so severe it'd be mistaken for passing. We have to do something," Ethan exclaimed, jumping up. "Right now. We can't just storm into the funeral home accusing Dr. Robert's son," Mrs. Martha reasoned. "We need proof, qualified medical help. But what if we wait until tomorrow and it's too late?" Ethan couldn't hide the urgency in his voice. Mrs. Martha checked the wall clock. It was almost midnight. "You're right. We can't wait. I'll call Dr. Mitchell. He was Robert's colleague in med school and never liked Richard. He'll help us." As Mrs. Martha made the call, Ethan stepped closer to the window. The rain was easing, but the sky remained heavy. He thought of his parents, who probably hadn't noticed his absence yet. When they did, they'd be frantic with worry, maybe even call the police. But if he could save Dr. Robert, it'd all be worth it. "Dr. Mitchell will meet us at the funeral home in 20 minutes, Mrs. Martha announced, hanging up. "He's bringing medical equipment and an official document to examine the body." She grabbed a coat and a large umbrella. "Let's go, Ethan. We don't have time to waste." On the way to the funeral home, the rain had finally stopped, leaving only a fine mist in the air. The streets were empty and quiet, except for the occasional sound of water dripping from rooftops onto the sidewalks. "Will Mr. Parker from the funeral home even be there at this hour?" Ethan asked as they hurried along. "He lives in the back of the funeral home," Mrs. Martha explained. "It's been that way for generations. The Parkers have always been the ones in charge of the farewell rituals in town." When they arrived at the funeral home, an old brick building with a discreet sign that read Parker and Sons Funeral Home. Since 1923, they saw a car parked out front. A middle-aged man wearing a dark coat over what looked like pajamas was waiting at the entrance. "Paul, thank you for coming," Mrs. Martha greeted as they approached. "Martha, this is completely irregular," Dr. Mitchell replied in a low voice, glancing around nervously. "If you're wrong, I'm not wrong," she stated firmly, "and we have a witness. This is Ethan. He saw Robert move during the wake." Dr. Mitchell looked at Ethan with a mix of skepticism and curiosity. "You're the boy who caused a scene at the wake, aren't you? I heard the talk." Ethan nodded, feeling his face grow hot. "I saw his eyelids move, doctor, and my phone registered a temperature when it fell into the casket." The doctor seemed to consider this for a moment, then nodded. "Let's check it out. I brought a portable EKG and an oximeter. If there's any sign of life, we'll detect it." Mrs. Martha knocked on the funeral home's door. After a few minutes, Mr. Parker appeared, wearing a robe over striped pajamas, his expression puzzled at the sight of the group. "Mrs. Martha? Dr. Mitchell, what's the meaning of this?" "George, we need to see Robert," Mrs. Martha said, her voice steady. "Now? It's nearly 1 in the morning. This is completely out of the question," Mr. Parker protested. Dr. Mitchell stepped forward, holding up an official document. "I have here an authorization for an additional medical examination of Dr. Robert Miller's body due to suspected misdiagnosis of death." Mr. Parker examined the document carefully, then looked at Ethan. "Isn't this the boy who caused that? Seen earlier, what's he doing here?" "Please, Mr. Parker," Ethan pleaded, his voice trembling but determined. "I saw Dr. Robert move. I know it sounds crazy, but what if he's alive? Don't you want to be sure?" Something in the boy's earnest expression seemed to sway Mr. Parker. He hesitated for a few seconds, then let out a deep sigh. "Come in. But if you find nothing, leave immediately and let me be." He led them down the funeral home's dark hallway to the room where Dr. Robert's casket rested. The room was cold and silent, lit only by a few electric candles that cast a solemn atmosphere. Dr. Mitchell immediately began unpacking his equipment from the bag he carried. Mrs. Martha approached the open casket, gently touching her companion's face. "Robert, we're here," she whispered. Ethan stepped forward timidly, a shiver running down his spine as he looked at Dr. Robert again. In the dim light, the elderly doctor looked extremely pale, but there was something in his expression that didn't quite match someone who had passed. There was none of the serenity Ethan had seen on his grandfather's face years before when he had died. "Let's begin," Dr. Mitchell announced, placing the oximeter on Dr. Robert's finger and carefully positioning the EKG electrodes on specific points of his torso, moving aside the dark suit the deceased wore. For long moments, only the low hum of the equipment filled the silence of the room. Everyone stared intently at the small screen of the device, which at first showed no readings. "I'm not picking up anything," Dr. Mitchell murmured. "Mitchell," furrowing his brow. "Try again, adjust the electrodes," insisted Mrs. Martha, her voice betraying a hint of desperation. The doctor repositioned the electrodes, checked the connections, and restarted the machine. Again, the screen remained blank. Ethan felt his heart sink. Had he imagined it all? He'd been so sure of what he'd seen. "Wait!" Dr. Mitchell suddenly exclaimed, leaning closer to the screen. "There's something here. Very faint, but there's something." He turned the machine's sensitivity to maximum. A barely visible line began to form on the screen, showing tiny peaks at long intervals. My God," whispered Mr. Parker, who was watching from the doorway. "Is it possible?" "Get my bag from the car, quick," Dr. Mitchell ordered Mr. Parker, who rushed out. "He's alive, but in a deep state of hibernation. We need to stabilize him and get him to the hospital immediately." Mrs. Martha covered her mouth with her hands, tears streaming down her face. I knew it couldn't be." Ethan felt a surge of relief and validation so intense his legs nearly gave out. He leaned against the wall, watching as Dr. Mitchell worked frantically, now fitting an oxygen mask over Dr. Robert's face. "We need to call an ambulance," the doctor said, administering an injection into the elderly man's arm. "And the police. This wasn't natural. Someone tampered with his medication, just as you suspected, Martha." Mr. Parker who had returned, with the bag, was already on the phone. "The ambulance will be here in 10 minutes, he announced, looking both shocked and relieved. "Ethan, you're a hero," Mrs. Martha declared, hugging the boy tightly. "If it weren't for you, Robert would have been—" She didn't finish the sentence, shuddering at the thought of what might have happened. As they waited for the ambulance, Ethan realized there was one more thing he needed to do. "Can I use your phone, Mr. Parker? I need to call my parents." The call was as difficult as Ethan had imagined. Mrs. Jennifer answered on the third ring, her voice groggy with sleep quickly, turning to panic when she realized her son wasn't home. "Ethan, where are you? We were about to call the police." "Mom, I'm at the funeral home," he explained, trying to stay calm. "Dr. Robert is alive, Dr. Mitchell is here, and we've already called an ambulance." There was a moment of silence. On the other end. "What, Ethan? What are you saying?" "Please, just come here. I'll explain everything when you arrive." When he hung up, Ethan noticed Mr. Parker looking at him with a curious expression. You know, young man, in 50 years in this business, I've never seen anything like this," he remarked, shaking his head. "How did you notice what none of us adults could see?" Ethan thought for a moment. "My grandpa always said kids see things adults miss because they stop believing in the impossible," he replied simply. Minutes later, the quiet street was filled with the sound of an ambulance siren. Paramedics quickly entered the funeral home, guided by Dr. Mitchell on the delicate situation. With extreme care, they transferred Dr. Robert to a stretcher and loaded him into the ambulance. Mrs. Martha climbed in to accompany him, but not before hugging Ethan one more time. "Thank you," she whispered. "Come visit us at the hospital tomorrow. Robert will want to thank you in person when he wakes up." As the ambulance drove away, a familiar car screeched to a stop in front of the funeral home. Michael and Mrs. Jennifer Thompson rushed out, followed by Grandma Ruth. "Ethan!" his mother called, running to embrace him. "What happened? Are you okay?" Ethan nodded, suddenly feeling exhausted, but deeply satisfied. "Dr. Robert was alive, Mom, just like I said." As Michael spoke with Dr. Mitchell, having obtained detailed explanations about what had happened, Grandma Ruth approached her grandson with a proud smile. "I knew you were right," she said, gently smoothing Ethan's messy hair. "You've always had your grandfather George's eyes. He also saw things others couldn't." That night, back home and wrapped in the comforting warmth of his bed, Ethan reflected on everything that had happened. It had been a frightening adventure, but also incredibly rewarding. He had helped save a life and, in the process, discovered something important about himself. His tendency to notice details others overlooked wasn't a flaw or the product of an overactive imagination, but a valuable gift. As he drifted off to sleep, Ethan had no idea that the events of that stormy night would change not only Dr. Robert Miller's life, but his own as well. And that the repercussions of what had happened at the small funeral home in Maplewood Springs would be far greater than he could imagine. The next morning, the news spread quickly through the small town. "Doctor declared dead, found alive before burial," announced the local paper. The story of the boy who refused to believe what everyone else took for granted traveled from mouth to mouth, gaining new details and proportions with each retelling. The regional hospital was flooded with reporters and onlookers, all eager for updates on Dr. Robert's condition and the boy who had saved him. The Thompson family, ordinary and unassuming people, suddenly found themselves in the spotlight. Michael and Jennifer, who the night before had wavered between relief at finding their son safe and irritation over his nighttime escapade, now didn't know how to react to all the attention. At breakfast, Michael read the paper with an astonished expression. "Looks like my son's a hero," he remarked, peering at Ethan over the newspaper. "Always has been," Grandma Ruth replied simply, pouring more juice for her grandson. "Just needed the right opportunity to show it." Jennifer, who was scrambling eggs in the kitchen, seemed more concerned. "The phone hasn't stopped ringing. Journalists, neighbors, even people we don't know wanting to talk to Ethan. This isn't good for a child." "Do you know what happened to Richard?" Ethan asked, ignoring the comments about his sudden fame. The adults exchanged meaningful glances. "He's under investigation," Michael finally answered. "It seems the suspicion about tampering with Dr. Robert's medication was confirmed, and more is coming to light about the embezzlement from the foundation." "Will he go to jail?" Ethan. asked wide-eyed. "We don't know yet, sweetheart," Jennifer replied, setting a plate of scrambled eggs in front of Ethan. "But the important thing is, Dr. Robert is recovering well. The hospital just released a statement. He's in stable condition, responding well to treatment." "Can we visit him today?" Ethan asked eagerly. Grandma Ruth smiled at her grandson. "I think so. Mrs. Martha called earlier while you were still asleep. She said Robert has been asking about the young hero and wants to meet you properly." Ethan felt his face flush but couldn't suppress a satisfied smile. The visit to the hospital felt like a small ceremony. Nurses and doctors stopped to greet Ethan in the hallways, some asking for photos, others simply smiling and nodding in approval. Dr. Mitchell, who was now personally overseeing Dr. Roberts' treatment, met them at the entrance to the intensive care wing. "Our patient is eager to meet his savior," he remarked, guiding the family down the hall. "He's still weak and can't talk much, but he insisted on seeing you." Dr. Roberts' room. Robert was spacious and bright, with large windows that let in the sunlight on that clear morning after the previous night's storm. Mrs. Martha sat beside the bed, holding her partner's hand. When she saw Ethan, her eyes lit up. "There he is, Robert, the boy who noticed what none of us adults could see." Dr. Robert Miller, even connected to monitors and still looking fragile, had a presence that commanded respect. His deep blue eyes fixed on Ethan with intensity. With a gesture, he asked the boy to come closer. "So, you're Ethan," he said, his voice weak but warm. Ethan nodded, suddenly shy. How did you know?" he asked. The doctor smiled faintly. "Observation is a doctor's most important tool," he remarked. "You have sharp eyes, a rare gift." Ethan smiled, feeling understood. "My grandpa George used to tell me stories about you," he said, "about how you worked together on difficult cases." The doctor's eyes brightened with recognition. George Wilson, an excellent nurse and an even better friend. "I'm so sorry for your loss." The conversation continued for a few minutes, with Dr. Robert asking Ethan about school, his interests, and his dreams for the future. Despite his weakened state, he showed genuine curiosity that immediately captivated the boy. "Have you ever thought about becoming a doctor?" he finally asked. Ethan had never seriously considered it, but now, face to face with the man whose life he had helped save, the idea seemed natural, almost inevitable. "I think so," he replied, "especially now." Dr. Robert exchanged a meaningful glance with Mrs. Martha before continuing. "When I recover, I'd like to mentor you, help prepare you, Sass, for that career, if your parents allow it, of course." Jennifer and Michael, watching the scene with emotion, shared a surprised look. "It would be an honor, Dr. Robert," Michael replied, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "Ethan's always had a natural curiosity for medicine. I remember when he was 5, he asked for first aid kits as Christmas presents." Dr. Robert smiled. "Then it's settled. We have a deal." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now back to the story. In the weeks that followed, the Thompson family's life underwent significant changes. The story of Ethan and his keen observation that saved Dr. Robert gained national attention. Newspapers, TV shows, and news websites retold the case of the boy who saw beyond. At first, all the attention was unsettling. Ethan, who had always been a quiet and somewhat reserved child, wasn't used to being in the spotlight. At school, his classmates treated him with a mix of admiration and curiosity that made him uncomfortable. Some teachers began valuing his observations more in class, while others seemed annoyed by his sudden fame. "How are you handling all this?" Grandma Ruth asked one afternoon, finding her grandson sitting alone in the backyard, watching a small anthill with intense focus. Ethan shrugged. "It's weird. People look at me differently now, like I have some superpower or something." Grandma Ruth sat beside him on the wooden bench. "You know, your Grandpa George used to say that the real gift isn't in doing extraordinary things, but in seeing the extraordinary in ordinary things," she remarked, gazing at the same anthill. "What you did was special, not because you saw something supernatural, but because you paid attention when everyone else was too busy following the expected script. Ethan reflected on these words for a moment. Do you think people will forget soon? Go back to treating me normally? Grandma Ruth smiled. People have short memories for most things, my dear. Soon there'll be another piece of news, another topic to talk about, but some people will never forget what you did. Dr. Robert, for example. And that's what really matters, don't you think? Meanwhile, Dr. Robert Miller was making steady progress in his recovery. The heart condition that had led to his state of catalepsy was being treated with new medication, and his strength was gradually returning. Investigations into the actions of his stepson Richard were advancing, revealing a complex scheme of embezzling funds from the foundation the doctor had created to help underprivileged seniors. Richard Miller, confronted with irrefutable evidence of his involvement in tampering with his stepfather's medication and siphoning money from the foundation, agreed to return the stolen funds and permanently step away from managing the family's assets. Though he avoided jail time, his reputation was irreparably tarnished, and he eventually moved to another state, far from the disapproving gazes of Maplewood Springs' residents. 2 weeks after the incredible night at the funeral home, Dr. Robert was discharged from the hospital. Instead of returning immediately to his own home, he chose to spend a period of convalescence at a small property on the outskirts of town, a retreat he had bought years earlier for weekend getaways but rarely had time to visit. Fresh air and peace are the best medicine now, Mrs. Martha explained during a visit to the Thompsons' home, and Robert wants to invite all of you for lunch this Sunday, especially you, Ethan. He has something important to show you. On Sunday, the Thompson family made their way to Dr. Robert's property. It was a charming place, with a stone and wood house surrounded by fruit trees and a small artificial pond. Mrs. Martha greeted them on the porch, wearing a colorful apron over a simple dress. So glad you came. Robert is in the library. He can hardly wait to show Ethan his collection. The library was a cozy room with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. Dr. Robert, seated in a leather armchair, looked much better than the last time Ethan had seen him. There was color in his cheeks and an eager spark in his eyes. Ethan, so glad you're here, he greeted, extending his hand to the boy. I have something to show you, something I think you'll like. He rose with some effort and walked to one of the shelves, retrieving an object wrapped in cloth. Unwrapping it, he revealed an antique microscope, beautifully preserved. This was my first microscope, he explained. My father gave it to me when I was about your age. It's how I discovered my passion for science. Ethan stepped closer, fascinated by the instrument. It's beautiful, he murmured, admiring the polished brass details. It's yours now, Dr. Robert announced, placing the microscope in the boy's surprised hands. Use it to keep observing the world with your special eyes. Ethan looked at his parents, silently asking for permission. That's a very generous gift, Dr. Robert, Michael remarked, impressed. Not as generous as the gift your son gave me, the doctor replied simply. A second chance at life. During lunch, served on the porch overlooking the pond, Dr. Robert shared his plans for the future. Now that he was regaining his health, he planned to reorganize the foundation, ensuring the resources were properly allocated to build the geriatric wing with quality materials and proper oversight. And I have another project in mind, he remarked, looking meaningfully at Ethan. A science school for young people, a place where curious children can explore their questions about the world and develop their observation skills. That would be wonderful, exclaimed Mrs. Jennifer, who was a teacher at the public school and often lamented the lack of resources for science activities. Our town really needs something like this. The idea is to start with a science club on Saturdays, continued Dr. Robert Miller enthusiastically. Open labs, research projects tailored for different ages, and of course, I'll need volunteer mentors. I thought you could be one of them, Ethan. Me? The boy asked, surprised. Who better than you with your extraordinary observation skills? The doctor smiled. Your experience could inspire other kids. Ethan felt a warm pride spread through his chest. The idea of helping other children develop their own observation skills, to see the world with more attentive eyes, seemed perfect. I'd love to, he replied with a smile. After lunch, while the adults chatted, on the porch, Ethan walked to the edge of the lake, where he sat on a rustic bench to watch the colorful fish swimming in the crystal-clear water. He was lost in contemplation when he sensed a presence beside him. It was Dr. Robert, who sat down with a satisfied sigh. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he remarked, gazing at the fish. "I've always found it fascinating to watch how they move, how they interact." Ethan nodded. "Each one has its own way of swimming," he observed. "That orange one over there moves in zigzags, while the silver one always seems to go straight." Dr. Robert smiled, pleased with the observation. "You know what's most interesting about observation, Ethan? The more we observe, the more questions arise, and it's the questions that drive science." They sat in silence for a while, just watching the quiet dance of the fish in the water. "So, I've been thinking a lot about what happened," the doctor finally continued. "About being in that coffin, conscious but unable to move or speak." Ethan looked at him with interest. "What was it like? Could you hear what people were saying?" Dr. Robert nodded slowly. "Partly. It was like dreaming but knowing it was real. I could make out shadows, distant voices. And then I heard your voice, clear and confident, saying I was alive." Ethan shivered at the thought of the experience. That must have been terrifying. "It was, but it was also revealing," the doctor replied, gazing at the horizon. "You know what I learned from all this, Ethan?" The boy shook his head, waiting for the answer. "I learned that sometimes we need to lose almost everything to understand what truly matters," Dr. Robert continued. "I spent my life building a career, accumulating knowledge, creating institutions. But lying in that coffin between life and death, I realized what really mattered was human connections, the lives I touched, the people I loved." He looked directly at Ethan, his eyes shining with restrained emotion. "And I learned that we must always trust our own perception, even when everyone around us says we're wrong. That's what you did, and you saved me because of it." Ethan smiled shyly. "I just said what I saw. And that's the point," Dr. Robert emphasized. "You saw with your own eyes and trusted what you saw, even when all the adults around, you supposedly wiser and more experienced people, told you otherwise. That kind of courage is rare, Ethan. Never lose it." At sunset, as the Thompson family prepared to leave, Dr. Robert called Ethan for one last private moment. "I want you to start coming here twice a week after school," he said. "I'll teach you everything I know about medicine, science, and most importantly, how to ask the right questions." Ethan felt a wave of excitement. "Am I going to become a scientist?" he asked eagerly. Dr. Robert laughed. "Only time will tell, but you'll learn to think like one. And that's what matters most." On the drive home, Ethan gazed out the car window at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky, thinking about everything that had happened since that afternoon at the wake. His life had changed completely in such a short time. From a boy often scolded for his overactive imagination, he had become a local hero recognized for his sharp perception. More important than the outside recognition, though, was the validation he felt inside. For the first time, his way of seeing the world, noticing details, making connections others missed, was valued as a gift, not a problem. "What's on your mind, sweetheart?" asked Mrs. Jennifer, turning from the front seat to look at her son. "I was thinking I want to be like Dr. Robert when I grow up," Ethan replied. "Someone who helps others and asks important questions." Mrs. Jennifer smiled, exchanging a proud glance with Michael. "I'm sure you'll be even better," she said. In the weeks and months that followed, Ethan divided his time between school, private lessons with Dr. Robert, and the newly formed Maplewood Springs Science Club. What started as a small group of curious kids quickly grew, attracting young people not just from town, but also from neighboring areas. Dr. Robert, invigorated by his new mission, seemed to grow younger every day. His recovery, which doctors had predicted would be slow and gradual, surprised everyone with its speed. He credited his improvement to the joy of working with the children, and especially to the satisfaction of watching Ethan grow. Under the experienced doctor's guidance, the boy flourished. His natural curiosity, now encouraged and directed, led him to explore fields as diverse as microbiology, astronomy, and forensic medicine. His already sharp observation skills were refined through specific exercises and hands-on experiments. The secret to good observation isn't just seeing, it's knowing what to look for, Dr. Robert explained as he guided Ethan through an experiment. And to know what to look for, we have to ask the right questions. Occasionally, when particularly puzzling medical cases arose at the regional hospital, Dr. Mitchell would invite Dr. Robert for consultations. On those special days, Ethan was allowed to tag along, watching from a distance as the doctors discussed symptoms and possible diagnoses. "He has a natural eye for medicine," Dr. Mitchell remarked once, impressed by Ethan's keen observation about a patient's unusual skin pattern, which helped identify a rare condition. "He'll make an excellent doctor someday." The bond between Ethan and Dr. Robert went beyond teacher and student. They became confidants, partners in discovery. The doctor found in the boy not just a talented pupil, but also a constant reminder of his own renewed purpose. And Ethan, in turn, found in Dr. Robert the kind of mentor he'd always dreamed of. Someone who didn't just answer his questions, but taught him how to ask better ones. "You know what I like most about you, Ethan?" the doctor remarked one afternoon as they examined lake water samples under the microscope. "You never settle for the first answer. There's always another question, another layer to explore." Ethan grinned, adjusting the microscope's focus. "You taught me to be that way." Dr. Robert shook his head. "No, my boy. You were always like this. I just gave a name to what you already did instinctively." Meanwhile, the Miller Foundation, now under new management after Richard's departure, continued with the geriatric wing project, but with strict oversight and top-quality materials. Dr. Robert, though officially retired, actively participated as a consultant, ensuring everything was done to the highest standards. "This project isn't just about building a structure," he explained to Ethan during a visit to the construction site. "It's about creating a place where the elderly can be treated with dignity, where they can receive the care they deserve." It was during this visit that Ethan made an observation that once again surprised everyone. "Why are the doors so narrow?" he asked, examining the blueprint one of the engineers was showing. "If a patient needs a wheelchair, or a doctor has to move large equipment through, it'll be difficult." The engineer looked at the blueprint, then at Dr. Robert, who smiled with satisfaction. "The boy is right," the doctor confirmed. "We need wider doors. Make the necessary changes." Later, walking back to the car, Dr. Robert remarked, "See how your observation made a difference? Imagine how many problems you prevented with a simple question." Ethan nodded, feeling that familiar wave of satisfaction that always came when his observations were valued and useful. As the months passed, the story of the boy who saved the doctor gradually faded, replaced by other local news. As Grandma Ruth had predicted, people have short memories, but the impact of that event on Ethan's, Dr. Robert's, and the Maplewood Springs community's lives continued to unfold in meaningful and lasting ways. One autumn afternoon, nearly a year after the incident at the funeral home, Dr. Robert invited the Thompson family for tea at his estate. There was a solemnity in his invitation that intrigued everyone. When they arrived, they found not only the doctor and Mrs. Martha, but also Dr. Mitchell, the town mayor, and other prominent community members. Clearly, something important was about to be announced. After initial greetings, as everyone enjoyed homemade cookies and tea on the porch, Dr. Robert asked for attention to make an announcement. "As you all know, last year I went through an experience that changed my perspective on many things," he began, his voice strong and clear, with no trace of the weakness he'd shown after the incident. "Thanks to the extraordinary perception and courage of a very special young man, I'm here today." He looked directly at Ethan, who blushed slightly under the attention. "This experience made me reflect on the legacy I want to leave, on how I can repay not just Ethan, but our entire community for the gift of a second chance I was given." Dr. Robert paused dramatically before continuing. "It's with great pleasure that I announce the creation of the Ethan Thompson Institute for Observational Sciences and Medicine, which will be built on land donated by me and funded by the Miller Foundation." A murmur of surprise and approval rippled through the group. Ethan, completely caught off guard, looked at his parents, who seemed equally stunned. "This institute," Dr. Robert continued, will be dedicated to training young scientists and doctors, with special emphasis on developing clinical observation skills. It will have laboratories, a library, a research center, and will offer scholarships to talented young people from across the country. He stepped closer to Ethan, placing a hand on his shoulder. And I'd like the first recipient of these scholarships to be the young man who inspired it all. Ethan, if you maintain your interest in medicine, your path will be secured from school to college and beyond. For a moment, Ethan was speechless, trying to process the magnitude of what he'd just heard. I don't know what to say, he finally stammered. You don't need to say anything right now, Dr. Robert smiled. Just keep being that extraordinary observer you are. The rest will come naturally. That afternoon marked the beginning of a new chapter in Ethan's life. The weight of responsibility that came with the announcement was significant but also thrilling. Having his name associated with an institution dedicated to science and medicine was an honor he could never have imagined. In the days that followed, Ethan spent hours talking with his parents and Grandma Ruth about what it all meant. Mrs. Jennifer and Michael, initially worried about the pressure such responsibility might place on a boy so young, were gradually reassured by Dr. Robert's sensitive approach. He doesn't expect you to become a medical genius overnight, Grandma Ruth explained to her grandson. He's offering you an opportunity, a path, if you choose to follow it. But what if I decide I want to do something else? Ethan asked, voicing a concern that had been bothering him. What if I want to be an astronaut, or a geologist, or... Then you'll be the best astronaut or geologist you can be, Michael finished, hugging his son. Dr. Robert will understand. He isn't buying your future, Ethan. He's just opening doors for you. Over time, the idea of the institute took concrete shape. Architects were hired, blueprints drawn up, and schedules set. Construction would begin the following spring, with plans to open in 2 years. Meanwhile, Ethan continued his studies, both at school and with Dr. Robert. The Science Club, now formally linked to the future institution, gained more and more members and recognition. During one of the club meetings, as Ethan supervised a group of younger children in an experiment on water's surface tension, a shy girl around 8 years old approached him. "Is it true you saved a doctor everyone thought had died?" she asked, her big brown eyes fixed on Ethan with admiration. Ethan smiled, already used to this kind of question. "I just noticed something others didn't," he replied simply. "What do you think you're seeing in this experiment?" The girl looked at the container of water and dye, where a drop of detergent had just been added, causing the dye to spread rapidly. "It looks like the water is running away from the soap," she observed. Ethan nodded, impressed. "Exactly. And do you know why?" The girl shook her head. "It's because of the water's surface tension," Ethan explained, feeling comfortable in his role as mentor. "The detergent breaks that tension, and that makes the dye move. It's like you can see invisible forces at work." The girl's eyes widened at the explanation. "How do you see things others don't?" she asked, clearly fascinated. Ethan thought for a moment before answering. "It's not about seeing different things. It's about paying attention to what's right in front of you, things we often miss because we're distracted or think we already know everything." "Can I learn to do that too?" the girl asked hopefully. "Of course you can," Ethan smiled. "In fact, you already have. Your observation about the water running away from the soap was exactly the kind of thing a good scientist would notice." The girl's face lit up with a proud smile. Later, when Ethan recounted the encounter to Dr. Robert during one of their study sessions, he realized there was something deeply rewarding about inspiring other children to develop their own observational skills. "She reminded me of myself," he remarked, "that feeling of seeing something no one else noticed." Dr. Robert smiled, pleased. "And now you understand why I'm so determined to create this institute," he replied. "Can you imagine how many other children like you and that little girl are out there, with the potential to make observations that could change the world, but without guidance to develop that gift?" Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. As autumn gave way to winter and winter to spring, life in Maplewood Springs carried on at its usual peaceful pace. The construction of the Ethan Thompson Institute finally began with a simple, groundbreaking ceremony that brought the community together. Ethan, dressed in a suit and tie for the first time in his life, gave a brief speech about the importance of observation and critical thinking, surprising everyone with his eloquence and maturity. "He's only 11, but he speaks like a college professor," remarked one woman in the audience, impressed. "That's what happens when you spend so much time with someone like Dr. Robert," her neighbor replied, nodding in agreement. For Ethan, however, fame and attention were secondary. What truly mattered were the daily discoveries, the small victories of knowledge, the moments of clarity when a new understanding formed in his mind, and above all, the growing sense of purpose he had found. One particularly sunny Saturday morning, as he helped Dr. Robert organize a new set of microscope slides for the science club, Ethan asked a question he had been considering for a while. "Dr. Robert, do you think I still would have become a doctor if none of that had happened?" The doctor stopped what he was doing and looked thoughtfully at the boy. "That's a fascinating question, Ethan," he answered. "It leads us to the concept of destiny versus chance, determinism versus free will. And what's your opinion?" Ethan pressed. Dr. Robert smiled. "I believe certain innate qualities in us seek expression throughout life, regardless of specific circumstances," he said. "Your ability to observe, your curiosity, your compassion, those were seeds already, planted in you." He paused before continuing. "Perhaps what happened was simply the catalyst, the event that sped up a process already in motion. In a parallel universe, maybe you'd have become a doctor anyway, just by a different path." Ethan considered this for a moment. "I like to think so," he said finally, "that somehow I would have found my way." "Me too," Dr. Robert agreed. "But I'm deeply grateful that in this particular universe, our paths crossed the way they did." That evening, during family dinner, Ethan shared this conversation with his parents and Grandma Ruth. "Dr. Robert said I probably would have become a doctor no matter what," he told them, helping himself to another serving of Mrs. Jennifer's lasagna. "That it was already inside me." "He's right," Grandma Ruth confirmed, looking at her grandson fondly. "I remember you at 5 years old, bandaging up every stuffed animal in the house, always asking Noah, why is the sky blue? Why do leaves change color? How do we know if a heart is beating?" "Like father, like son," Michael added with a smile. "Your grandfather George was the same way. Remember when he'd come home from the hospital with those stories about mysterious patients, how he always said the diagnosis was in the details?" Mrs. Jennifer nodded, her eyes bright with the memory of her father. "Daddy used to say 90% of diagnosis was in the patient's history and physical exam, and only 10% in lab tests," she recalled. "To us, the tests only confirm what a good observer already knows," he used to say. "That sounds exactly like something Dr. Robert would say," remarked Ethan, surprised by the similarity. "It's no coincidence," Grandma Ruth smiled. "They studied together, trained in the same school of medical thought, and now that tradition passes to you, Ethan." The boy felt a comforting warmth at the thought of this lineage of knowledge, this passing of wisdom through generations. From his grandfather to Dr. Robert, and now to him. In the months that followed, Ethan continued to flourish under Dr. Robert's guidance. His school grades, always good, became exceptional. His teachers noticed not just his mastery of the material, but also his ability to connect different subjects, to see patterns where others saw only isolated facts. "He has a naturally interdisciplinary mind," his science teacher commented during a meeting with Mrs. Jennifer and Michael. "It's as if he doesn't see the traditional barriers between chemistry, physics, and biology. To him, it's all part of one integrated knowledge." This integrated approach was also reflected in the projects he developed for the science club. While other students usually focused on one specific area, Ethan designed experiments combining elements from multiple disciplines. A project on sound propagation in water, for example, involved principles of physics, human ear anatomy, and even perception psychology. Dr. Robert watched this growth with satisfaction that went beyond a mentor's pride. To him, Ethan represented validation of his own teaching philosophy and medical practice, proof that attentive observation, and a curious mind were science's most powerful tools. "Do you know why I chose observational medicine as the Institute's focus?" he asked Ethan one afternoon as they reviewed the updated blueprints for the construction site. Ethan thought for a moment. "Because that's how you practiced. Medicine? By observing patients carefully?" "Yes, but it's more than that," Dr. Robert replied. "Modern medicine has become overly reliant on technology. Scans, advanced blood tests, high-resolution imaging. All valuable tools, no doubt." He paused, collecting his thoughts. But something was lost in the process. The art of clinical observation, thorough physical exams, attentive conversations with patients. Younger doctors often jump straight to tests without truly looking at the person in front of them. Ethan nodded in understanding. "Like that case, with Mr. Parker at the hospital last month? The doctor ordered a CT scan without even examining his throat first." "Exactly," Dr. Robert exclaimed, pleased Ethan had made the connection. "And what did you notice when you looked at Mr. Parker? That he had distinctive red spots on the roof of his mouth, a sign of a viral infection, not bacterial." The scan was unnecessary. "Precisely," the doctor confirmed. A 10-second observation saved an expensive, unnecessary test. "That's the approach I want to preserve and promote through the Institute." Their conversation was interrupted by Mrs. Martha's arrival, carrying a tray with coffee and homemade cookies. "What are you two discussing so seriously?" she asked, setting the tray down. "About the importance of observation in medicine," Dr. Robert answered, "and how our young advocate here is the perfect example of it." Mrs. Martha smiled, sitting beside them. "You know, Ethan, there's something I never told you about the day you showed up at my door soaked from the rain, saying Robert was alive." Ethan looked at her curiously. "What?" "I had my own suspicions too," she confessed. "In fact, I was about to go to the funeral home that night. I had noticed inconsistencies in the death certificate. I knew Robert's heart condition better than anyone." "Why didn't you come forward sooner?" Ethan asked, surprised. Mrs. Martha sighed. "Fear, doubt, the feeling that maybe I was being irrational, driven by denial." She looked at Dr. Robert with tenderness. "And Richard made sure to keep me away from everything, using his influence to prevent me from even seeing Robert. So, when I showed up, it was like a sign, confirmation that my suspicions weren't just the delusions of a heartbroken woman," she finished. "Your courage gave me the strength I needed." Dr. Robert took Martha's hand, squeezing it gently. "That's why I always say Ethan saved us both," he said. "Me, from catalepsy, and Martha, from paralyzing doubt." It was a moment of revelation for Ethan, realizing his actions hadn't been isolated but part of a convergence of factors, people making difficult choices at critical moments. Spring gave way to summer, and summer to fall once more. As construction on the Ethan Thompson Institute progressed, life in small Maplewood Springs took on new energy. The prospect of a high-level research and education institution drew attention and resources to the town, creating opportunities and challenges. Ethan, now 12, watched these changes with a mix of excitement and responsibility. Seeing his name attached to something so significant was both inspiring and intimidating. "What if I'm not up to it?" he confided to Grandma Ruth one evening, as they sat on the porch gazing at the stars. "What if I let everyone down?" His grandmother adjusted her glasses, looking at him fondly. "Ethan, dear, you've already proven yourself many times over. It's not about being perfect or knowing all the answers. It's about keeping curiosity alive, the ability to ask questions, to challenge the obvious." She paused, carefully choosing her next words. "You know, your grandfather George always said a scientist's greatest quality isn't intelligence, but humility. The willingness to admit you might be wrong, to change your mind when the evidence points another way." Ethan thought for a moment. Dr. Robert says something similar, that science isn't about certainty, but about pursuing doubts with method and rigor. "Exactly," Grandma Ruth smiled. "And that's why you'll be an excellent scientist, or doctor, or whatever you choose to be, because you understand that instinctively." The conversation brought Ethan a new sense of comfort, easing the weight of expectations he sometimes felt. In the days that followed, he threw himself into his studies and projects with renewed enthusiasm, not to prove his worth or meet others' expectations, but for the sheer joy of discovery. Meanwhile, Dr. Robert's health, which had remained stable for over a year after the incident, began showing subtle signs of decline. Nothing dramatic, just more frequent fatigue, occasional forgetfulness, shortness of breath during longer walks. Signs he, as an experienced doctor, recognized, but tried to downplay around others. Mrs. Martha, however, noticed everything, and after much insistence, she finally convinced him to get a full checkup with Dr. Mitchell. The results weren't alarming, but indicated a gradual worsening of his heart condition. Nothing we can't manage with proper medication and some lifestyle changes, Dr. Mitchell explained during an appointment Mrs. Martha insisted on attending. But you need to slow down, Robert. Fewer hours at the institute, more rest. Dr. Robert reluctantly agreed. For someone who had always been so active, the idea of cutting back was challenging. But he also knew better than anyone the importance of taking care of one's health. That's when an idea came to him. Why not speed up Ethan's preparation, transfer more knowledge, more responsibility, start preparing him for a more active role in the future institute? He's still very young, Mrs. Martha cautioned when Dr. Robert shared this thought. 12 is practically still a child. An extraordinary child, Dr. Robert replied. I'm not suggesting we overwhelm him or rob him of his childhood. Just intensify his training a little. Give him more access to advanced resources, maybe even start introducing him to some important contacts in the medical community. After some deliberation, they decided to speak first with Jennifer and Michael to get their approval. The meeting took place at Dr. Robert's country home on a Sunday afternoon. We'd like to propose a more intensive educational program. For Ethan, Dr. Robert explained once everyone was comfortably settled in the living room. Nothing excessive, just a deeper dive into what we're already doing. He detailed his proposal. 2 mornings a week dedicated to advanced studies in science and medicine, occasional trips to universities and research centers, participation in more complex scientific projects. The goal is to expose him to a richer academic environment, prepare him for the challenges ahead when the institute is operational, he concluded. Of course, only if you agree, and if Ethan wants to. Jennifer and Michael exchanged glances. The offer was tempting, an educational opportunity very few children would ever have, but there were also legitimate concerns. What about his socialization? Jennifer asked. He already spends so much time with adults or studying alone. He needs to be around kids his age too. Absolutely valid, Dr. Robert agreed. That's why I'm proposing just 2 mornings a week, and we can incorporate social components too. Maybe other talented young people in the area could join some activities. And what if at some point he wants to stop? Michael asked. If he decides he wants to take a different path? Then we'll stop immediately, no questions asked, Dr. Robert assured. This should be a joy for him, not an obligation. After more discussion, Jennifer and Michael agreed to present the idea to Ethan and let him decide. To their surprise, the boy didn't show the immediate enthusiasm they expected. Can I think about it? He asked, surprising everyone with his caution. I'd like to make a list of pros and cons. Of course, Dr. Robert replied, impressed by the boy's maturity. Take all the time you need. That night, Ethan sat at his desk with an open notebook, trying to organize his thoughts. Dr. Robert's offer was incredible, an opportunity most kids interested in science could only dream of, and yet something made him hesitate. After staring at the blank page for a while, Ethan decided to seek out Grandma Ruth. He found her in the living room, knitting while watching a TV show with the volume low. Grandma, can I talk to you? He asked, sitting beside her on the couch. Grandma Ruth set her knitting aside, giving her grandson her full attention. Of course, sweetheart. What do you want to talk about? Ethan explained Dr. Robert's proposal and his hesitation. I don't understand why I'm hesitating, he confessed. I should be excited, right? It's an amazing opportunity. Grandma Ruth considered the situation before answering. Ethan, sometimes our hesitations come from places we don't consciously understand. Is there something specific about this proposal that worries you? The boy thought deeply. I'm afraid I won't be good enough. He finally admitted of disappointing Dr. Robert. After everything Robert invested in me, Grandma Ruth nodded understandingly. It's a natural fear. But you know what I think? That Dr. Robert would be more disappointed if you accepted something you don't truly want just to please him. It's not that I don't want to, Ethan clarified quickly. I do. I'm just nervous, I guess. And it's okay to feel that. Way, Grandma Ruth reassured him. In fact, nervousness usually means something matters to us. It's when we feel nothing at all that we should worry. She paused, looking directly at her grandson. You know what your grandpa George would say. Right now? Ethan shook his head. He'd say, if it doesn't scare you at least a little, it's probably not worth doing. Ethan smiled, feeling a connection to the grandfather he never got to know well. So, fear is a good sign? Fear can be an excellent advisor as long as we don't let it make decisions for us, Grandma Ruth replied wisely. It makes us consider risks, prepare better, and do our best. The conversation with his grandmother gave Ethan the clarity he needed. The next morning, he told Dr. Robert his decision. He would accept the intensive educational program on the condition that he could still participate normally in school and social activities with his friends. A very sensible decision, Dr. Robert approved. Balance is essential in life, no matter what path we choose. And so began a new phase in Ethan's education. Twice a week, he went to Dr. Robert's office, which had been adapted into a small lab and library. There, he immersed himself in advanced topics in biology, chemistry, physics, and basic medicine, guided by the experienced doctor. Occasionally, trips were arranged to universities and research centers in larger cities. During these visits, Ethan was introduced to professors, researchers, and doctors, many of whom were impressed by the young man's maturity and knowledge. He has the kind of intellectual curiosity that can't be taught, remarked a renowned neurologist after Ethan visited her lab. It's innate, organic. I don't see this often, even among college students. Meanwhile, construction of the Ethan Thompson Institute was progressing quickly. The main building, with its modern architecture that blended with the town's colonial style, was already structurally complete. Labs were being equipped, libraries stocked with books and scientific journals, and classrooms furnished. As the opening date approached, set to coincide with Ethan's 13th birthday, the whole town was buzzing. The institute wasn't just an educational opportunity for local youth, but also a major source of jobs and visibility for Maplewood Springs. It was in this atmosphere of anticipation that Ethan made a surprising suggestion during one of his sessions with Dr. Robert. What if we created a special wing in the institute, he proposed as they reviewed the final building plans. A space dedicated to teaching observation techniques to already trained healthcare professionals. Dr. Robert looked at the boy with interest. Go on, I'm listening. Well, you always say many modern doctors have lost the art of clinical observation, Ethan explained. Maybe we could offer refresher courses, intensive workshops on detailed physical exams, interpreting subtle signs. The doctor smiled, clearly impressed. An excellent idea, Ethan. In fact, it's something I've considered myself but wasn't sure there'd be enough interest. If you, someone so respected in the medical community, offer these courses, I'm sure many would come, Ethan argued. And we could use real cases like you do with me. Show how careful observation led to diagnoses that high-tech tests failed to detect. Dr. Robert nodded enthusiastically. Let's incorporate this into the plans right away. We can adapt that space on the third floor that still doesn't have a designated purpose. In the following weeks, this idea was developed and expanded. What began as a simple suggestion turned into a full program with a structured curriculum, teaching materials, and even simulations of complex clinical cases. As the Institute project took its final shape, Dr. Robert's health continued to fluctuate. There were good days when his energy and enthusiasm made everyone forget about his heart condition, and bad days when exhaustion forced him to stay home. Keeping up with progress only through reports and photos Mrs. Martha took during her visits to the construction site. One particularly difficult afternoon, when Dr. Robert had to cancel a session with Ethan due to a sudden bout of illness, the boy decided to visit him anyway, bringing along a new medical book he had found at the public library. Arriving at the house, he found the doctor sitting on the porch wrapped in a blanket, despite the mild warmth of the day. His face was pale, but his eyes lit up when he saw Ethan. "You shouldn't have come," he said, though his smile softened the scolding. "You were supposed to rest today." "I brought something for you to see," Ethan replied, holding up the book. "It's about rare cases of catalepsy in the 19th century. I thought it might interest you." Dr. Robert took the book with slightly trembling hands. "Always the keen observer, aren't you?" he remarked, flipping through the yellowed pages. "Finding treasures where others wouldn't even think to look." They sat in silence for a while, simply enjoying the view of the well-tended garden and the distant sound of birds. Then Dr. Robert spoke in a more serious tone. "Ethan, I need to tell you something important." The boy felt a tightness in his chest, sensing something was wrong. "What is it, Dr. Robert?" The doctor closed the book and looked directly at Ethan. "My condition is worsening faster than we expected," he said calmly. "The new test results aren't good." Ethan's throat tightened. "But aren't the medications working?" "They're slowing the process, but they can't stop it completely," Dr. Robert explained. "It's the nature of life, Ethan. We all have our time." "Don't talk like that," the boy protested, tears welling in his eyes. "You'll be fine. You'll see the institute open. You'll teach there. Dr. Robert placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder, gently interrupting him. "And what if I can't be there physically?" he asked. "The institute will still exist. The knowledge we've shared will live on through you and all the young people who will train there." "It's not the same," Ethan murmured, unable to hold back the tears now. "Maybe not," the doctor agreed. "But it's the continuity of life. It's how science progresses, how knowledge moves forward. Not through eternal individuals, but through passing wisdom from one generation to the next." He paused, gazing at the horizon before continuing. "When you found me in that coffin, Ethan, you gave me the gift of more time. Precious time I used, to create something meaningful, something that goes far beyond me. Now I want you to promise me you'll use that gift too." "How do you mean?" Ethan asked, wiping his tears. "Promise me you'll live fully, that you'll pursue your passions, use your gifts to help others," Dr. Robert replied. "It doesn't matter if it's through medicine, science, or any other path you choose. What matters is that you make a difference, just as you already have in my life." That day's conversation left a deep mark on Ethan. In the days that followed, he dedicated himself even more fervently to his studies and the preparations for the Institute's inauguration. It was as if every scientific fact he learned, every detail he observed, was a tribute to Dr. Robert and the knowledge the doctor represented. As the inauguration date approached, Dr. Robert seemed to gather renewed strength. He personally oversaw the final construction details, attended meetings with potential sponsors and collaborators, and continued his study sessions with Ethan, now with a sense of urgency he didn't voice but the boy clearly sensed. 3 days before the official inauguration ceremony, which would coincide with Ethan's 13th birthday, Dr. Robert suffered a severe relapse. He was rushed to the regional hospital, where Dr. Mitchell and a specialized team worked tirelessly to stabilize him. When Ethan heard the news, he wanted to cancel all the inauguration preparations. "We can't do this without him," he insisted, when his parents and Grandma Ruth tried to convince him otherwise. "The Institute is the fulfillment of his dream. He needs to be there." It was Mrs. Martha who finally changed his mind. Sitting beside Dr. Robert's hospital bed, she held her partner's hand while speaking to Ethan through a video call. "Robert wants the inauguration to proceed as planned," she said, her voice steady despite the sadness in her eyes. "It was the last thing he asked me before he fell asleep." Ethan swallowed hard, trying to process the information. "Is he—" He couldn't finish the question. "He's stable, but very weak," Mrs. Martha replied. "The doctors are doing everything they can, but—" She hesitated. "We need to be prepared, Ethan, and we need to honor his wish. The Institute must open its doors on the scheduled day." After a long silence, Ethan nodded. "All right," he finally agreed. "But I'll dedicate the ceremony to him, and I want everyone to know that without Dr. Robert, none of this would exist." The final preparations for the inauguration continued in a bittersweet atmosphere. The entire town seemed torn between excitement for the Institute's opening and concern for Dr. Robert's health, as he remained hospitalized, fighting bravely for his life. The night before the inauguration, Ethan visited the doctor in the hospital. Dr. Robert was awake, but visibly weakened. Still, his eyes lit up when the boy entered the room. "Ready for the big day?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Ethan nodded, holding back his emotions. "I wish you could be there," he said, sitting beside the bed. "I will be," Dr. Robert replied with a faint smile. "Maybe not the way we'd like, but I'll be there." They talked for a few minutes, the doctor asking about the final details of the institute, and Ethan answering with as much optimism as he could muster. Before saying goodbye, Dr. Robert motioned for Ethan to come closer. "Do you remember what I told you that day at the farm?" he asked. "About using my gifts to help others?" Ethan replied. "Of course I remember." "That's your true legacy," the doctor continued. "Not the building, not the name on the institute, but the commitment to careful observation, the pursuit of knowledge, and using that knowledge to improve people's lives." He paused, breathing with some difficulty before continuing. "When you're there tomorrow cutting the ribbon, receiving applause, remember this: it's not about glory or recognition, it's about service, about making a difference." Ethan solemnly promised he would never forget that lesson. The next morning, the day dawned exceptionally clear and sunny, as if nature itself wanted to celebrate the occasion. The Ethan Thompson Institute, with its imposing yet welcoming facade, was decorated with flowers and banners. A small crowd had already gathered nearby, eager for the ceremony that would begin at 10 a.m. Ethan, dressed in a suit his parents had bought especially for the occasion, was more nervous than ever before, not so much about the ceremony itself, but because of the responsibility he felt and the painful absence of Dr. Robert Miller. When it was time for his speech, Ethan stepped onto the small stage set up at the entrance of the institute and looked out at the crowd. He saw familiar faces: his parents, Grandma Ruth, schoolmates, teachers, neighbors, and others he didn't know, officials, journalists, onlookers drawn by the event. Everyone watched him expectantly. Taking a deep breath, he began to speak. "Just over a year ago, I was at a wake, observing something no one else saw," he started, his voice surprisingly steady. A slight movement, a sign of life where everyone else saw only the end. "It was a moment that changed my life and the lives of many people in this community." He paused, glancing at the institute building before continuing. "But what I truly learned that day wasn't just the importance of careful observation. It was that we should never stop questioning, never stop looking closer, never stop trusting what we see, even when everyone around us tells us otherwise." Ethan then spoke about Dr. Robert, how the doctor had turned a traumatic experience into an opportunity for growth and learning, not just for himself, but for the entire community. "This institute doesn't bear my name because I'm special," he emphasized. "It bears my name as a reminder that sometimes the clearest insight comes from those who haven't yet learned to ignore the obvious, from those who still see the world through the eyes of a discoverer." As his speech continued, Ethan noticed an unusual movement near the institute's entrance. Several people turned, murmurs rippling through the crowd. Pausing mid-sentence, Ethan looked in the same direction. And there he was. Dr. Robert Miller, in a wheelchair pushed by Mrs. Martha, was slowly making his way up the main path. He was pale and visibly frail, but his eyes shone with determination. A respectful silence fell over the crowd, followed by a wave of spontaneous applause. Ethan, unable to contain his emotions, rushed down from the stage and knelt beside the wheelchair. "You came!" he exclaimed, tears of joy in his eyes. "But how? The doctors—" "Let's just say I was very persuasive," Dr. Robert replied with a faint smile. "And Dr. Mitchell agreed, as long as I go straight back to the hospital as soon as the ceremony is over." Mrs. Martha, also emotional, explained, "He insisted so much that the doctors finally gave in. But we're only allowed to stay for an hour." With Michael's help, Ethan escorted Dr. Robert to the stage. The doctor's presence, though weakened, brought renewed energy to the ceremony. Together they cut the ribbon, symbolizing the official opening of the Ethan Thompson Institute for Observational Sciences and Medicine. After the ceremony, as guests explored the facilities, Ethan stayed by Dr. Robert's side in a quiet room, reserved, so the doctor could rest before returning to the hospital. "Thank you for coming," Ethan said, still hardly believing the surprise. "It meant so much to me." "I couldn't miss it," Dr. Robert replied. "I wanted to see the beginning of this journey with my own eyes." He looked around at the freshly painted walls, the modern equipment, the carefully arranged books on the shelves. "Do you know what makes me proudest of all this, Ethan?" "What?" "That it's not the end of a story," the doctor answered, "but the beginning of many more. Every young person who walks through these doors will have the opportunity to develop their own keen eye, to make their own discoveries. And it all began with a boy who refused to believe what everyone else took for granted." Dr. Roberts' words proved prophetic. In the weeks, months, and years that followed, the Ethan Thompson Institute became a vibrant hub of learning and discovery. Young people from across the region, inspired by the story of the boy who saved the doctor, came to hone their observation and critical analysis skills. Dr. Robert, defying the most pessimistic medical expectations, continued his battle against heart disease. Though he never fully regained his strength, he had enough moments of improvement to occasionally visit the institute and even teach special classes for the most advanced students. Ethan, in turn, grew up under the watchful and caring eye of his mentor. By 16, he was nationally recognized for a scientific paper on clinical observation techniques, which he co-authored with Dr. Robert. At 18, he received a full scholarship to study medicine at the country's most prestigious university. But beyond all the academic achievements and formal recognitions, what truly defined Ethan was the same quality that had set him apart on that fateful afternoon at the wake: the ability to see what others missed, to question the seemingly obvious, and to trust his perception even when it contradicted the general consensus. And whenever someone asked how he had developed such an extraordinary skill, Ethan would tell the story of the day he saved a man from being buried alive, and how that man, in turn, taught him to see the world with truly open eyes. The end of the story. Dear listener, have you ever witnessed a moment where your observation made all the difference? Share your experience with us in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more heartwarming stories that remind us of the transformative power of paying attention to the details.